It's a pleasure to be back, and it's a pleasure to make this tradition to introduce the ambassador panel. It changed a little bit from year to year, but we are very proud that the invitation to the ambassadors are accepted and can meet here during the session during the High North dialogue. It's very interesting to listen to you guys, what messages you have to this young audience, and we're also curious what you bring back home actually when you leave us. I will get back to that. All of you who are represented here today are either representing members of the Arctic Council through an organization or directly members to the Arctic Council. Before we start the panel discussion, I want to introduce to you the State Secretary, Eivind Petersson, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, who will give us a 5 minutes introduction, I think. Very welcome, Eivind.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for that, Arne. The High North dialogue has indeed developed into one of the most interesting places to meet and to discuss Arctic affairs. And we do so this year under very different circumstances than before. It has been more than a year since Russia launched its brutal and illegal full-scale invasion of its neighbor Ukraine. And the war has changed Europe and reminded us of what is at stake. It has challenged the rules-based system we all rely on. It has also profound impacts here in the north. The dialogue arenas in the Arctic have adapted to Russia's brutality. From my side, just a couple of points on the Arctic Council and on the green transition. The Arctic Council, on May 11th this year, in just 3 weeks, Norway will take on the responsibility as chair of the Arctic Council. Following Russia's attack on Ukraine last year, all official meeting activity in the Arctic Council was put on pause. And continuing cooperation in the Council during the current Russian chair is not possible. But the current situation is not sustainable either. A defunct Arctic Council or alternative structures is not in our interest. The Arctic is warming at an alarming pace. Ice is melting, and we need multilateral cooperation to tackle climate change and the effects on ecosystems and the people in the Arctic. And as we continue to prepare for our upcoming chairship, our main goal is to make sure that the Council survives. We are well aware that this will not be an easy task, and we may not succeed, but we will try. We hope and believe that it is possible to agree on procedures and find ways to interact which ensures that the structure remains intact and that the important work of the Arctic Council can continue. Ultimately, however, the political reality will reflect what will be possible to achieve. The 4 priorities of our upcoming chairship of the Council are the oceans, climate and the environment, sustainable economic development, and people in the north. Our priorities reflect long-term Norwegian priorities for the Arctic and for Norway's Arctic policy, which are founded on knowledge and the principles of responsible and sustainable management. The future of the Arctic region depends on us being able to create real opportunities for Arctic youth. Arctic youth and Arctic indigenous peoples will therefore be cross-cutting priorities of our chairship. Our main focus now is to ensure a smooth transition of chairships in May in just 3 weeks. It will be a different chairship than we had envisioned, but possibly the most important chairship in the history of the Arctic Council. The green transition is one of the main pillars of our Arctic policy, as outlined by the Prime Minister when he was here just a couple of days ago. It is key to further developing Northern Norway as a robust region. And as chair of the Arctic Council, Norway will highlight sustainable economic development as an essential basis for social development in the Arctic. The green transition, the blue economy, sustainable shipping, and Arctic food systems will be special thematic priorities for the Norwegian chairship. The rich natural resources of the Arctic are already playing a role in economic development and supporting dynamic communities. The new geopolitical situation has profound consequences on so many levels, also in the Arctic. We have spent decades building trust between Arctic nations, establishing platforms for dialogue and cooperation, working together on climate change, on sustainable management, and amongst our indigenous populations. Today, almost any kind of cooperation with Putin's regime is impossible. What is not on hold, however, is the green transition. On the contrary, Russia's aggression has added a security policy dimension to the need to accelerate the transition to sustainable economy. And I look forward to discussing these and very many other issues with the ambassadorial colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dag, and I'm pleased to introduce the rest of the panel. I take it in the way it stands here. Deidre Kent from Canada, please take the stage. Timo Tanner from Finland. There you are. Niklas de Granville, EU Ambassador to Norway. Hogni Christiansson, Iceland. And not least, Mark Nathanson from United States. He knows always how to charm us, dressing with the Bodø/Glimt scarf. But that's the same trick as the Prime Minister had yesterday, so we will see if it works today as well. Welcome to all of you. I also hope to include you, the audience, during this discussion, so please be prepared if you have any question. It's not every day you can meet representatives from the Arctic Council like this. I want to start pretty easy, I guess, because during these 2 days, it's a lot of discussion about Arctic Council, and Eivind mentioned it himself. It's kind of a true story that Arctic Council, that we need Arctic Council. But when I walk around among the audience here, I got a lot of questions. Do we really need Arctic Council? And why do we need Arctic Council in the new situation? So I think that will be the opening question. Starting with you, Deidre, why do we need Arctic Council?
For Canada, the Arctic is central to our identity. We're a quarter of the Arctic in the world. It's 40% of our land mass. It is an important home for local communities, for indigenous communities, but we need to cooperate. We saw beautiful maps earlier showing the oceans connecting. We saw the world from the North Pole. And if we're going to protect our environment, our peoples have sustainable development, it doesn't stop at their borders. So the Arctic Council has been and needs to be an important forum for that collaboration across the Arctic states. And as the State Secretary said, we want it to work. We are committed to working with like-minded, with Norway as the incoming chair, to make the Arctic Council a success, but it cannot be business as usual after the illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
Which also explains why this panel doesn't include Russia, of course, as it normally would do. I go to you, Timo. Why do you think, from a Finnish view, that Arctic Council still is important?
Yes, I mean, if we wouldn't have the Arctic Council, we would have to invent it. I mean, that is very clear. And I think the history of the Arctic Council shows how important it is, because there are so many projects that's been realized and so many agreements made that it has proved its concrete value. Of course, now we are in a new situation, or have been, and so now we just have to try and cross the bridge, transfer the chairmanship to Norway in a smooth as possible way. Of course, we have found a way to continue with the projects without Russia. That is one way to go. But I mean, we have to preserve the institution because it is so important.
I don't know, Eivind, you always in your introduction talked about it. Is there anything you want to add?
Just very briefly, that I agree fully that if we didn't have the Arctic Council, we would have to invent it. And the reality now is, if it were to disappear tomorrow, decisions about our Arctic future will be moved elsewhere, because there is no lack of interest globally in the Arctic, and we as Arctic countries have both rights and responsibilities to take the driver's seat collectively, so to speak, on making decisions about our own territories, about our own sea areas. Those decisions should primarily be up to us, and if we cease to deal with the issue, decisions will be made elsewhere.
When I go to you, Nicholas, I mean, you are not even an observer state to Arctic Council. Maybe that would change when Russia is out of the game for the time being, but why is Arctic Council important for the European Union?
You have both in the Arctic Council as in many other fora. Thank you very much, Arne. You have the spirit and the project and the vision that you share together, and the institutions. While you don't have necessarily the full picture on the project, on everyone agreeing on the affectio societatis, I would say, you have the institution in the meantime that can, under the radar screen, at low and discrete dimension, can continue to exist, and that can be reactivated when the global situation changes. So that's why it's very important to be able to continue with what we have in common, what we can do together for the moment, taking into consideration the international situation that has dramatically changed since last year in February, as all said, but to continue what we can continue, and therefore closing the house is not the solution. It's keeping it open and possible for any further movement. That's why, as enjoying almost an observatory status in the Arctic Council, the EU is there to continuing supporting the projects and the service to the local populations' interests, and globally to those of the whole of Europe and of North America on this.
Thank you. How does that look from Iceland?
Yeah, I can echo what the others have said. I mean, I think Eivind said that if we would not have the Arctic Council, would have to be created. And also, I think it is important to look at the history of the council. I mean, this is a work that has been ongoing for decades. So this is really the forum for Arctic issues to be discussed among governments, sort of intergovernmental forum. And it is not only about, let's say, the Arctic states proper members of the Arctic Council. It's also about the observers. This is also the venue for others to participate in discussion about the Arctic. So this is a real investment over decades, so we should be very, very careful to throw that away. And just another point here, just to illustrate and connect the Arctic Council with some of the issues that have been discussed at this conference. I have heard every now and then search and rescue. And there is an agreement on search and rescue among the Arctic member states, and that is negotiated within the framework of the Arctic Council. So this is extremely important forum that we should do everything in our power to protect and keep going.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we move to U.S. Mark. Why is it important from the United States?
Well, I agree with all my colleagues here. It is important to all of us and up here, and not just the United States, but for the world. As far as we're concerned, the Arctic Council is critical, and the Arctic is critical. The High North is critical to understand the world, the future of the world, climate in particular, and what is going on. We all must cooperate. Unfortunately, Russia under Putin has disqualified themselves from participating, in my opinion, in international organizations such as the Arctic Council because of their unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. But we must continue the work for all of the countries, not only in the Arctic Council, but for the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you very much. To try to dig a little bit deeper into it, because it's hard to see what kind of, if you listen to the scenarios, they were talking about climate, they was talking about a possible war as two of the main factors for the future. It's hard for me to see what of these big issues is best solved inside the Arctic Council. Doesn't these problems have a solution that is outside the Arctic Council? What is the preference of the Arctic Council actually to solve these kinds of problems? Anyone?
Well, I mean, in the Arctic Council, of course, the countries around this panel are there, and that is, of course, very important that there are Northern European countries, but also the United States and Canada, and of course, potentially Russia, but not at the moment. So that is, of course, very important that we have this global viewpoint there. But then, of course, you have also the Barents Cooperation, which I would underline, that is between regions, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and then, of course, Nordic cooperation. So I think these form a whole where we can discuss not only climate-related issues, but more broadly issues related to societal development in the North. So I would combine all these, but of course Arctic Council is the predominant institution in Arctic cooperation.
And I would add that the Arctic Council, and well, everyone up here today, our countries are committed to a rules-based international order by following international law, and the Arctic Council is embedded in that. So the Arctic Council is not there alone. It is part of our multilateral and legal framework internationally. It is allowing very specific Arctic-based cooperation to happen. And I think a critical pillar of the Arctic Council is also having our permanent partners, partnerships at the table. So having our indigenous populations as active, formal members of the Council that are contributing to the future of the Arctic, where they are living and earning their livelihoods and raising families and having education. So that's a second critical aspect of the Arctic Council as a body going forward.
Eivind?
Yeah, if I may, as international organizations go, the Arctic Council has actually been surprisingly successful, and it has only been in existence for less than 3 decades. What can it do that no one else can? I mean, the track record is, as I point out, rather impressive. I think the issue I keep coming back to is climate change, because it is important for each of our countries that this is now, the temperature is rising fastest in the Arctic, the ice is melting, it is affecting us. But what is happening here has obvious global implications, and the groundbreaking new insights that we've managed to produce and find under the umbrella of the Arctic Council has global importance. It's the simple fact that researchers from our respective countries can literally compare notes, compare data, can view the entire Arctic as one, incredibly important in terms of understanding climate change for our region and the whole world.
Nicholas, is there anything Arctic Council can do about the climate that can't be done better in the European Union?
I don't know whether it can be done better or not, but I think it's almost a paradox. The Arctic region is a concentrate of the challenges of modern life, of future modern life as well, and globalization. It's true of how to develop human, economic, social, cultural activities in harsh conditions vis-à-vis the nature, insularity, geographic conditions. Then you have the whole environment dimension, where, as it has been said, the climate crisis is striking harder than in many other places. There are some spots around the world where it's even more sensible and sensitive. You have the high interest for transportations, these new maritime routes, energy, critical raw materials, new sources of possible energy with, because we shouldn't see only the fossil fuel dimension, but also the all possibilities that exist in the region as in the global North Atlantic, Northern Sea dimension, etc. So there are a lot of maybe the effects of a lot of problems, but also a lot of solutions that are here. And you know, the EU being present through a certain number of member states, with the very strong like-mindedness we have with Norway, we are here to be present, to help, to carry projects, as the ambassador of Canada said, to contribute to a stable, rules-based international, European northern dimensional order, but this is valid for the rest of the world, where we have to tackle specific problems with solutions that we think are sustainable and far-reaching.
As a democratic moderator, anything to add?
I think we should not lose sight of the fact that the Arctic Council is a regional cooperation. And you mentioned, and you pointed that question to my EU colleague here, whether this shouldn't just be taken care of by Brussels. That's all very well. I mean, Brussels set maybe a set of rules, let's say, but those rules need to be implemented. And they need to be implemented in the regions on site. And a lot of the issues that have been discussed exactly at this conference are very regional. They are pinpointed at what can be done in the region. With cooperation between the members, the cooperation between countries, regions in the north. So we should never lose sight of the fact that this is a regional cooperation.
Mark, you agree?
No, I agree throughout the world that there are many different forms to deal with world problems. But when you have countries that have a common interest, such as the Arctic, such as the countries we're talking about, I think they have to be intimately involved in solving those problems and working together. And Norway is a perfect example of a country that has provided leadership in this area, and we need all the members of the Arctic Council to do that. It is a pity, as far as I'm concerned, that Russia is not right now active in the Arctic Council, but that should not stop the research and the work of cooperation together of all the other Arctic nations. And I think it's very important that the Arctic Council continues to do what it has done under the new leadership, in this case, of Norway.
Okay, so it's in a way in your hand, Eivind, how this will spin off. But we have to talk a little bit more about Russia. I mean, it's not only, as everybody knows, half the Arctic. The new Russian Arctic strategy seems to be built on a greater cooperation with the so-called BRICS countries. They are moving their Arctic implication and to invite the BRICS country to invest more in the Arctic. Is Russia trying to build up a separate organization competing with Arctic Council, or what will happen if Russia, India, China, Brazil get a stronger hold on Arctic? How should Arctic Council react?
Well, I mean, to your first question, no, not yet. They're not setting up a new body. But I mean, we are following closely on what's happening and seeing discussions going on, of course, between Moscow and Beijing, but also interestingly, for example, between Moscow and New Delhi about increased cooperation. However, there are certain geographic realities we cannot escape. Yes, Russia is by far the largest Arctic state. We cannot cut Russia out of the map. But in terms of Arctic issues, further geographic reality is that's the other Arctic nations that are the natural partners around the table in the Arctic Council. And coming back to one of my earlier points, is that it's both a question of rights, of interest, and responsibility that we make sure that the Arctic Council survives with the Arctic key stakeholders around the table.
Okay, there may be different opinion inside the Arctic Council these days among the seven Arctic states, among what kind of dialogue, if any, should we have with Russia. When I listened to the Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre yesterday, I think he said that we need some kind of dialogue to get to the Arctic Council to survive on some level. And it's also said by other officials from the Foreign Department. When I asked the Finnish guy, Jani, from yesterday in the panel, what kind of dialogue or contact should we have with Russia during this period, he said none at all, as far as I could understand. What is your take on that, Teemu?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think now we have to cross the bridge of transition of chairmanship. I think that is the most important next phase. And once we have done that, of course, we have to discuss other issues, how we move forward with the cooperation. So far, we have been able to continue with the projects without Russia in this new situation. I think that has been a healthy situation. Of course, as has been said earlier, it's not business as usual, so we have to take that situation into consideration. And of course, we have an EU sanctions policy, which also is part of the equation. So I think this has to all been discussed, but first, I think I turn to my Norwegian colleague, that we have to have this transition.
If I may again, yes, we agree wholeheartedly that the priority now is the transition, because the transition is key to so many other things. I can assure you that diplomacy has been at work.
I know, but I want to know more about it.
And you will, in due course, a couple of key principles beyond the first and foremost, let's get the transition in order, is that Russia has not been expelled from the Arctic Council. It has not withdrawn. There are no plans to expel Russia from the Arctic Council. Still, business as usual on the political level is out of the question. And future of the Arctic Council will have to reflect political realities. And then
I know, but Timo, you mentioned the European sanction, and one of the differences inside the Arctic Council is the membership of the European Union. Norway is not a member of the European Union. So I ask you then, Nicholas, is that possible if, I won't get Eivind to answer this, but if the goal is to have some scientific cooperation with Russia inside the Arctic Council or the working groups, is that okay with the European Union?
We have, as it has been said, the sanctions and the two limits. I personally don't think that scientific contacts should remain as the same way they have been practiced for until 24 February, until the war has encompassed so many changes. I think if you have personal contacts, if you have on occasions like this, it may be something. On the other hand, the sanctions are quite comprehensive. There are 10 packages. They are aiming at a certain number of entities, institutions, interests, exports, persons, individual persons. I think, a contrario, when there is no sanction foreseen against X or Y activity, maybe there might be some contacts, work, preparation for the future under the radar screen. Also, keeping in mind that the personal integrity, security of these persons has to be respected.
Okay.
We wouldn't like to endanger anyone by saying, "Oh, we continue contacts because."
Try to clarify with including more. What is the Canadian standpoint here?
Well, I agree. I mean, we want to keep the...
Who do you agree with?
I agree with the State Secretary. Well, I haven't heard anything I disagree with, but I would say we want to keep the Arctic Council. It is a unique institution. It has served well. We've had to pause because of Russia. We've been able to open the door to some projects continuing where Russia isn't involved. It shows, we have the will there to continue what is possible in the current circumstances. We want the Arctic Council to work towards a sustainable, peaceful Arctic. So our objectives are there, and I'll just say we have the greatest confidence and will give full support to Norway as they make the steps over the next few weeks to see that transition through. And yes, there's a certain amount of impatience, but I think when we get to that stage, we'll be able to reach a different phase.
It's the reason they are called diplomats, isn't it? Høgni.
Okay. Well, you will not be surprised that I would say that I, of course, agree. No, just to pick up the point from Teemu, of course, the main thing now is to get the chairmanship over in an ordinary way. That's number one. And number two, because we referred to the speech of the Prime Minister, I think he also said that we will not be back to any business as usual. I think he said that as well.
You said that.
So we are very much, my country is very much coming from that angle as well. And my third point, because you mentioned possible impact of sanctions on whether we do or do not cooperate with the Russians, or maybe rather the other way around, just to keep in mind, sanctions have actually been in place since 2014. So from that time until 24th of February last year, we cooperated actually with Russia within the Arctic Council.
Good. I will turn the rest of the debate into the business, green business, and things like that. But if there are any questions from the audience, I will open up for it now. There is a hand back there. It's a microphone also. I hope you accept questions from the audience.
We'll think about it.
Hi. Okay, so we got a couple questions in our app. And so the first question is, why is the U.S. opening an office in Tromsø?
Is that official? Mark?
The U.S. is very interested, particularly the Biden administration and our Secretary of State, in the High North and the Arctic, and we are looking at more presence. No final decision has been made. This is also subject to the approval of the Norwegian government, which has not been given, but we are certainly looking at to increase our presence in the High North in every area.
But that you also want to call it an embassy. It's not a consulate, it's an embassy, isn't that right?
What we're looking at is a presence, to have more activities in the North. We were just in a meeting with Nord University about more student exchanges, more faculty exchanges, more cultural exchanges. The United States and the Biden administration is very focused, and as you all know, the Biden administration for the first time has named, subject to Senate approval, of an Arctic ambassador. We've never had that before. So the Arctic is a focus of this administration and of the United States. So I think there will be more and more activities as far as the United States is concerned related to the Arctic, as well as the other countries here who are already active in the Arctic and will continue to be.
But if I wrote in my newspaper, Heino's News, that the United States is establishing an embassy in Tromsø, would that be right or wrong?
That is not correct. There's only one embassy in a country, and that is in Oslo right now.
Right.
But we are looking at expanding our presence in the High North. So that's all I can say on the subject right this moment.
Thank you, Mark. And you had a question?
Thank you. So we got another question. And this goes for all 6 of you. Could the panelists share one success story of what the Arctic Council has ever done for local citizens?
On one hand, we may have time for that. On the other hand, if they start talking, we don't have time for that. How should we solve this? Could you say it with a few words?
Just one example. I think one of important projects which has been ongoing for quite some time are reducing black carbon emissions. The black carbon is a real disease because when it falls on the ice, it increases the melting of the ice. And of course, that contributes to climate change and to emissions. So I think that is a concrete example which helps all of us in a society. And I think it's part of
main issues.
Also the Norwegian priorities for their generation.
One of the main cases from a former High North hero, Paavo Lipponen, actually, as far as I remember. Yeah. One more story, we can't take 6 stories.
I'll just say, I mean, that's the beauty of the Arctic Council. It is actually working on 130 concrete projects at any time. One terrific example is the agreement on search and rescue that came through the Arctic Council. It's probably not very well known, but allowing concrete efforts on search and rescue in the Arctic.
Nicholas.
No, go ahead.
Maybe very quickly, because it's in the same vein. The fishermen just the other day that were rescued by authorities, not from their own country, but from another Arctic country, I think they're quite happy about the fact that the Arctic Council structures have made it possible to cooperate on those kind of issues.
I wanted simply to say promoting human contacts.
Great. One more question from the audience, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm Wang Jing from Shanghai and East China Normal University, and also a participant of the High North Dialogue Academy. So my question is, given the fact that we are talking about all the opportunities in this fantastic area, the Arctic region, and so my question is this: will there we are talking about the business and the outer space and the ocean opportunities with all of these things in it, and I'm quite sure that will be little more conflict in this area. And so how do we what obstacles may be faced in this Arctic cooperation, and not only on the military level, and how the Arctic Council will deal with it, and what role do you expect the non-Arctic countries like China plays in it, and whether the Arctic Council can promise a peaceful Arctic future for the younger generations? Thank you.
Oh. That was a complicated question. Thank you very much. You want to promise something, Mark?
No, it's complicated, but it goes back to an earlier point you made about both China, Brazil, and India. I think all 3 countries that we were talking about are very concerned about the climate. And in talking to my colleagues at the embassy, the ambassadors in those countries, they are constantly working with those countries on what is going on in the world. And there is a role for the Arctic countries to work with other countries that are not in the Arctic on this issue, and particularly in the area of climate. And I think this is a concern to China, concern to Brazil, and certainly a concern to India.
Thank you very much, Mark. I hope that was a little bit of an answer, at least to you. We have to talk some 5 minutes about green industry in the Arctic, because that is what has been the melody through all the debates actually we had, and we introduced a lot of battery production data and things in the Arctic because we used to have cheap energy, and then the United States come with the US Inflation Reduction Act, and we heard yesterday from one of the big producers of battery that they are moving to the United States if Norway don't answer with the same substitute or whatever you would like to call it. And I guess that is also for other Arctic countries. So I'll start with you, Eivind. Is it possible to compete with the economic solution that the United States had offered to Arctic industry on the green side? Do you have the money?
Norway is in the very fortunate position that we have a sovereign wealth fund. So in a sense, yes, we have the money. But it's not going to be helpful for any country or the wider humanity if we end up in a subsidy race. We have more to gain if we manage to find working cooperation, including competition in some areas, but a subsidy race is not beneficial for any one of us. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. Let it also be said, it is great news that the US is finally stepping up in terms of green transition, climate investments, very, very good. But we need to make sure that we can play on each other's strengths and not have a situation where there is a subsidy race. We should avoid that, and there are talks and negotiations and diplomacy underway to find solutions for that.
How do you work on that issue, Nicholas, in the European Union?
Well, we've been first seeing the dependencies we had during the COVID crisis, during the Ukraine war, the dependency on energy, on key products, on raw materials, and from the outside world. We have seen the American reaction with the IRA. We have been discussing closely with the US as close partners on the subject, and the European Commission has come up with a whole plan that is called the Green Deal Industrial Plan that encompasses a regulatory dimension to facilitate investments and financing of projects in the green industry and the green transition dimension. The framework for financing and finding in the spirit of that the State Secretary described, without subsidies or trade race with anyone, how to finance, how to subsidize, how to improve and orient skills towards this aim, and how to find the right trade instruments to be in connection with our partners around the world on this. And I would like to add, we would like to do this as much as possible in close cooperation and having Norway on board as far as the European Economic Area Agreement makes it possible, knowing there is a bit of a thin line between Norway's full participation in the single market, but Norway not being a member of the customs union. This applied maybe to a subject raised this morning, that was space. This applies to issues in the health dimension. This applies to the response to the IRA. Thank you.
Is that a problem in Canada as well?
Well, we're lucky to share a very long border with the United States, and climate change doesn't see the border there, so it's important to see the US step up. We are also, like Norway, we're an important energy producer and provider to a big population south of us, but similarly very committed to a green transition and combating climate change where we can. For example, Canada is the only Western country with 100% of the critical minerals required for electric vehicles, batteries. And so we're seeing big investments, even with the IRA there's a recognition of a free trade zone that we have with the US, that we have with Europe, that we have with Norway and Iceland. So we still see a rules-based trading order as an important part of how we can collaborate to see a green transition that is going to be fair and collaborative.
Are you in Finland afraid of losing investment nationally because of this?
Well, I mean, of course there are worries, as were expressed here by State Secretary, but I'm quite optimistic that we can find solutions here, because, I mean, there's such a long-standing economic partnership with the European Union and the US. We have $1 trillion trade between us. So I think there's a lot of will to go forward. And when the Commission has been quite effectively discussing with the US, I think there we see already a skeleton of an agreement emerging, and I think that is very, very positive. So we don't need trade barriers between EU, US, of course, Canada, other countries. I think we need cooperation. And since we've been so strongly together aiding Ukraine, I think that is, a proof and a good omen that we will find solutions also on the economic front.
One sentence each in the end. What are the takeaway back to your country when you leave Bodø later tonight or tomorrow?
I'd say over the last 2 days, my takeaway is something we like to say in Canada, which is when we're talking about the Arctic, is nothing for us without us, or nothing about us without us. So that means Indigenous peoples, local communities, and youth that we have well represented here. So that has come through loud and clear when we're looking at a future that's affecting all of us.
Thank you, Timo.
Yes, to add to this, I think, of course, the urgency to address climate change, I think you hear it from, and we're addressing an issue which is really important, not for us, but especially for the young people. Another thing is the discussion on need for skilled labor. And that's a takeaway. We're discussing this and trying to find solutions also on a Nordic base. So we need kind of talent boost efforts so that we can attract people to the north. And I think, possibilities are here because there will be more renewable energy and more industry. So I'm optimistic.
Thank you, Timo. Eivind, you just arrived, so I'd skip you. Nicholas.
Thank you. Well, not exclusively, but in addition to the previous speakers, I would like to say the Arctic, the North, the high North should be and become always more a place where you can live, work, have human cultural exchanges, study in the best conditions possible and in the most stable and sustainable way.
Høgni.
Two things. Dynamics. This is my first time here at this conference here in Bodø, to witness the dynamics that are ongoing here. Second point, your emphasis on young people, the youth. I mean, half of there was a discussion yesterday how to define youth, but it's very interesting to see the emphasis you have on youth here. So my conclusion definitely after this first time is I will be here again next year.
Thank you very much. Mark, have you picked up anything you want to send back to Joe Biden before you leave?
Well, no, I just want to clarify for everyone that the IRA was a domestic piece of legislation by the Biden administration that needed to amplify what the United States did in the whole green transition. And I say to all of you, in my final words, there is no issue on this planet more important, not just to the United States, not just to Norway, and certainly to the Arctic, than the whole issue of climate change. And so that is the emphasis that I want to leave you all with.
Thank you very much, panelists, ambassadors. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to see you back next year. Take care, and thank you to the audience.
Tusen takk. Thank you.